Did you know that some of the most common foods in your pantry could be making you age faster? Foods you'd never expect, like popular snacks or even everyday cooking oils. I'm Dr. Hilary Lynn, a Stanford-trained longevity physician, and today we're exposing these hidden danger foods that could be silently accelerating your aging. These ingredients contribute to inflammation, oxidative stress, and even cellular damage, aging you from the inside out. I'll break down exactly why these foods are so harmful, how to recognize them on labels, and share some easy swaps that can protect your health. We'll also dive into the surprising science behind how certain additives affect your brain and energy levels. But it's not just about what to avoid. I'll also reveal the powerful anti-aging foods that can slow down the clock, boost your energy, and support long-term health. And at the end, I'll share some simple diet changes that could make all the difference starting today. In part 1 of Danger Foods, we discussed 5 ways diet can worsen aging: oxidative stress, inflammation, cellular senescence, or the zombie cells, impaired stress resilience, and advanced glycation end products, AGEs. We dove into saturated fats and added sugars last time. All of these accelerate our aging. Today, we're going to go into more advanced topics and ingredients that accelerate our aging. Let's talk about these real villains lurking in our foods: trans fats, hydrogenated oils, and artificial additives. These ingredients are those sneaky saboteurs. They work undercover and they cause all kinds of trouble at the cellular level. Trans fats, why do they even exist? They were initially popular because they're easy to use, inexpensive, and they give foods a longer shelf life with a nice mouthfeel, a desirable texture. Plus, trans fats can be reused many times in commercial fryers, making them really cost-effective for restaurants and fast food outlets. So they were the go-to option for creating these stable, long-lasting products that could survive on store shelves and provide that consistent food texture and flavor. But these came at a great cost to our health. They're some of the worst culprits when it comes to speeding up aging. There's 2 types: naturally occurring and artificial. I'll bet you didn't know that some of these are actually natural. These naturally occurring trans fats are produced in the gut of some animals and can be found in small amounts in dairy and meat products. The artificial kinds, though, are created through an industrial process called hydrogenation. So that's where partially hydrogenated oils come from, hydrogenation. So that turns liquid vegetable oils into solid fats like margarine and shortening. So remember when we used to think margarine was good for you and that was like supposedly better than butter? And now, oh my gosh, now it's really come out that this stuff is possibly even worse for you. The artificial trans fats, like we mentioned, partially hydrogenated oil. So you can look out for those in case your food still might have some of these. So when oils are subjected to high heat during frying or hydrogenation, some of these unsaturated fats transform into trans fats. So even in countries where trans fats have been banned, you can't add them or use them officially. If you're subjecting some vegetable oils or unsaturated fats to high heat, you can still create trans fats. It's kind of like trying to shove a round peg into a square hole. The heat sort of melts and forces the fats to take on the shape that they weren't meant to, and it makes them harmful. Even healthy fats can end up being transformed into harmful fats because of high heat, which occurs during processing of foods. Despite the well-documented health risks, trans fats are still found in many processed foods. A little background about this: in 2015, the FDA finally declared that partially hydrogenated oils were no longer generally recognized as safe, or GRAS. So that's like an indication that many food products are given to indicate that they're okay for usage, despite not going through this formal process of approval. So the FDA declared in 2015, not true for partially hydrogenated oils or trans fats. They were formally banned by 2018, and that led to a significant reduction in their use. Great. However, in most countries, food labels can still claim 0 trans fats if the amount per serving is below a certain threshold, usually around 0.5 grams. So this means that even seemingly safe foods can contain small amounts of trans fats, and these can add up really quickly, especially if you eat a lot of processed foods. It's this combination of regulatory loopholes and also the production of trans fats through processing, like we mentioned, or cooking, that leads to the presence of trans fats in our food even today. Let's go into a bit more detail about how trans fats specifically cause problems to our health. Lots of studies have proven now that consumption of trans fats is linked to increased risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and even neurodegenerative diseases. They do raise your so-called bad cholesterol levels, LDL-C, or your bad lipids, and they lower HDL, which is good, typically. And they turn your bodies into a sluggish, creaky system. And research shows that trans fats can get incorporated into the very cell membranes of delicate organs like your brain. So imagine trying to communicate through a phone with a cracked screen. You can't see what's going on, and a muffled speaker. That's kind of what happens to our brain, our neurons, our brain cells, when they're dealing with trans fats invading in their membranes. So they disrupt the brain cell communication, and they may contribute even to dementia, cognitive decline. So it's like adding static to your brain's radio. No one wants that. Get rid of trans fats. Chronic consumption of trans fats also triggers inflammation, oxidative stress, and disrupts normal lipid metabolism. This obviously leads to really poor health, faster aging, and shorter longevity. Inflammation, remember, is our body's immune response to harmful stimuli. It's really good when you want to fight off an infection or quickly heal a wound. However, it's bad if you've got low, medium levels of inflammation chronically or all the time, because your body thinks that it's trying to fight something off all the time, and that's not a good thing. So trans fats promote inflammation by activating certain pathways that release harmful cytokines. Those are signaling proteins that promote inflammation. This leads to endoplasmic reticulum stress, which occurs when the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum, this is a cellular structure. So inside the cells, there are these structures that are responsible for creating new proteins and folding them in a structure. So the ER becomes overwhelmed in this inflamed state and can't properly fold proteins. That leads to disruptions in cell health. So it's almost like if you had a factory in your body, every single cell had a little factory manufacturing machines to make everything function well. The factory itself is falling apart and everyone's striking, perhaps, and therefore the machines it's producing are becoming less efficient. Therefore, you end up with cell dysfunction. ER stress means cell dysfunction, and that leads to further health issues. Additionally, trans fats lead to increased oxidative stress. So that's the imbalance, remember, of the production of harmful molecules called reactive oxygen species and the body's ability to neutralize them. Reactive oxygen species are these unstable molecules. They damage essential cellular components, everything from your lipids, the protein, to even your DNA. So it's really, really bad for a lot of reasons. It can cause chronic disease, aging, cancer. So all around, not great. The oxidative stress accelerates our cellular aging, and this process is where accumulated damage impairs the function and replicative potential of cells. So that leads to deterioration of our vital organs and their functions. And this buildup of damage can lead to development of the chronic diseases that we all fear. Trans fats also increase insulin resistance. So that is when your body cells don't respond well to insulin anymore. This typically, classically happens when you have really high levels of sugar in your blood, and then your body's producing more and more insulin, and your cells are getting drowned out with all that insulin signal. So it's like deafening. And then so they become deafer and deafer, and then they don't hear the signal of the insulin. That is insulin resistance. That can lead to all sorts of metabolic diseases. Classically, most often we talk about type 2 diabetes, but there are a lot of downstream effects of metabolic disease. This impairs the function of blood vessels as well, so they don't expand and contract effectively, which is another risk factor for heart disease, brain problems, strokes. These trans fats you can think of as sticky sludge in our pipes, in our system. They clog up everything and make it harder for all of our cells to function optimally. That brings me to how trans fats are incorporated into the cell membranes, like we discussed before. That alters their fluidity, and we need fluidity of the cell membranes because cell membranes don't exactly have doors like a house does. They have permeable walls. So you want them to be fluid. They want to be able to move around, allow the good stuff to come in, not the bad stuff. And the trans fats stiffen it and makes it problematic for proper functions to take place. Membrane-bound enzymes, these are proteins that we need for proper function, and receptors, they start failing as a result of the stiffening due to the trans fats. Homeostasis, the balance that is needed for cells to function properly, gets unbalanced, and it makes it harder for cells to communicate and maintain stability. There's also the accumulation of something we call lipid intermediates, so ceramides. So these are fat molecules that play a role in important functions like cellular signaling, so like the call and response that the cells have to one another. and for controlling stress response as well. Also for diglycerides. So these are other molecules involved in fat metabolism. This all exacerbates that ER stress that we talked about, where the machinery for manufacturing proteins breaks down, and so everything malfunctions. We have more and more inflammation, more cellular dysfunction, more death, and more aging and more chronic illness. The damage doesn't end there. So trans fats also impact our telomeres. So these are the protective caps, like the plastic at the ends of shoelaces, protecting the shoelaces from fraying. And these telomeres protect the ends of our DNA. When they're replicating, they tend to have some wear and tear. And this results in degradation and problems like mutations and downstream diseases. This can lead to that cellular senescence that we've talked about on this show before. That hastens the aging process. You've got these zombie cells hanging out, causing issues, leaking bad toxins that lead to trouble for even healthy cells. Trans fats affect your immediate health, but also accelerate the overall aging of our body by reducing the number of times a cell can safely replicate because of that fraying of the DNA, therefore causing a lot of issues to tissue health. On top of all of this, we actually have some studies in animal models like fruit flies showing that trans fats can actually shorten lifespan quite directly. It's pretty well tied together. It's also a poorer quality of life, and we see impacts like locomotor, so movement deficits, and even increased anxiety as we age. We're really turning our body when we eat trans fats from this sleek dream machine. So I've used the analogy of like your dream car, the only car that you'll ever own. You're turning it from that well-oiled car into something that is rusting and falling apart much, much earlier than it should. Quick recap, trans fats are artificially created fats or naturally occurring in some smaller proportion that became popular because they enhance shelf life and provide stable textures in food. They raise bad LDL cholesterol and lower the good HDL cholesterol and lead to inflammation, oxidative stress, insulin resistance, accelerated aging. They directly disrupt our cell membranes function and disrupt ER function as well. That leads to downstream effects. They also contribute to accelerate aging by shorting the telomeres, the protective caps at the end of our DNA. That leads to genomic instability and further aging, essentially. Trans fats also increase that oxidative damage, that rusting, and despite all of this, we still unfortunately see small amounts of trans fats found in many foods due to loopholes, like having small proportions that add up in our processed foods. Read your labels. Make sure that there's absolutely nothing still left, especially if you're in a country that doesn't have great regulation around partially hydrogenated oils. And then if you want to go safest, go for whole unprocessed foods, which are crucial for your long-term health. Let's dive now into food additives and how they are speeding up our aging process. Starting with food coloring and preservatives. So, you know those bright neon colored candies that seem too good to be true? They are too good to be true. We call them artificial colorants, and they have names like azo dye food colorants, AFCs. Some of these that you might recognize are tartrazine, so that's FDNC yellow number 5 or E102, metanyl yellow, malachite green, and Sudan 3, and preservatives like benzoate compounds. So these all can mess with our health in some pretty sneaky ways. So studies have even shown that they can lead to brain issues. They can harm the brain by direct impact or by interacting with the gut bacteria and producing toxic byproducts. For example, tartrazine has been linked to oxidative stress and neurodevelopmental toxicity. It actually changes our brain chemistry and behavior as we're developing too. If you also talk a little bit more about that gut microbiome and how it impacts that, if your gut microbiome is this lovely, beautiful city, if you add in some artificial preservatives, it's like dumping a truckload of pollutants into your river. So that's really, really bad. It leads to a lot of downstream bad effects. Other colorants like sunset yellow, that's E110, quinolone yellow, E104, and erythrocine, that's FDNC red number 3 or E127, are also really common in our food products. They've also been linked to oxidative stress and neuroinflammation, can lead to cognitive decline, particularly in older populations in our studies. So consuming these additives over a long period of time can contribute to neurodegeneration, memory issues, and impaired learning. Some specific conditions, because I think this is so interesting and we don't talk about it enough. So tartrazine and erythrocine have been specifically linked to several syndromes and conditions. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Some of these synthetic food colorings are associated with worsening ADHD in children. And we have studies actually showing this, that dyes can disturb behavior through mechanism involving what we've discussed, the oxidative stress and neuroinflammation. These same food colorants can also impair our memory and our speed of thinking. We see this in stress markers that we can measure, like MDA, and also it decreases antioxidant enzyme activities, leading to neuroinflammation and cognitive deficits. We also can see effects like mood disorder. So anxiety and depression can get worse. And we showed this very directly in animal models. This is mediated through increased levels of these pro-inflammatory signals, like from cytokines like TNF alpha and IL-6, and other oxidative stress markers as well. And like I mentioned before, we see also neurodevelopmental toxicity. Some of this is through mitochondria-mediated apoptosis, leading to significant neurobiochemical changes and behavior changes as well. In the perinatal population, so when you're pregnant, for example, a lot of things are happening to your baby, and exposures to these artificial colorants have been shown to trigger oxidative stress and neurobehavioral alterations, even in the fetus. That can lead to anxiety reflexes or locomotor, so movement sort of behavior issues. And this has been shown more directly in animal models, but there's good reason to believe that this is happening in humans as well. Scary stuff isn't over. Now let's talk about non-caloric sweeteners. I spoke a little bit about sweeteners before, but I wanted to quickly recap and dive a little bit into some details we didn't yet discuss. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but unfortunately, non-caloric sweeteners are typically not that great for you. We talked about some of these potential risks already, and a quick recap is that research has linked many non-caloric sweeteners to a higher risk of heart disease, depression, and even obesity. It's so ironic because we're trying to avoid sugars to stay healthy, but these sweeteners can cause other types of issues because they're affecting our metabolism. They're messing with our gut microbiome, and it's throwing off all of our balance. Non-caloric sweeteners have also been associated with more specific harms like metabolic dysregulation. So I want to talk about the specifics here because I think that's important when people are picking and choosing what alternatives to use. Chronic exposures to saccharin, which is in Sweet and Low, and sucralose, which is in Splenda, acetylsulfame potassium, which is ACK or Sonnet, and aspartame, which is Equal or NutraSweet, has all been linked to increased food consumption, actually. Ironic, weight gain, and fatness. The technical term is adiposity, but it's true, it's all been linked. And this is due to the uncoupling of the sweet taste and the caloric intake. So it turns out you don't need calories to result in all of these effects, actually. It disrupts the body's ability to predict the metabolic consequences of sweet tasting foods. Our bodies are evolved to function in such a way that we understand sweeter things are supposed to create certain effects in the body. And it turns out that sometimes it's not just the calories. There's other mechanisms that these non-caloric sweeteners are messing with that result in all these bad effects, even though there's no calories or very few calories involved. Long-term use of non-caloric sweeteners has also been associated with really specific heart risks, such as high blood pressure, the metabolic syndrome that we discussed, type 2 diabetes, and even heart disease events themselves, like heart attacks and strokes. We have studies showing that consumption of diet beverages that are sweetened with non-caloric sweeteners is correlative with higher incidences of all of these things. Messing with the gut microbiota is also really, really important. So just really quick review, the gut microbiota gets impaired when you introduce certain non-caloric sweeteners, and that can impair our glycemic control and contribute to worse metabolic disorders. We also have some studies suggesting a link between certain artificial sweeteners such as aspartame and acetylsulfame K and an increased risk of cancers such as breast cancer and obesity-related cancers. These are still being debated. I don't know that we're ever going to find the true answer because there's a lot of industry bodies sort of fighting about these results, but I do think it's enough that we should be cautious about it. We also have some very direct adverse effects, like side effects, GI disturbances. Some of these non-caloric sweeteners can really cause bloating or discomfort. It can cause headaches, lightheadedness, and some people are also allergic to them. So just to watch out. There's no such thing as free lunch. There's no perfect artificial sweetener or alternative, but I typically go for the more naturally occurring type sweeteners. If it doesn't bother your stomach, allulose is a different form of sugar that our body doesn't register calorically. So it's less harmful, but it can cause a lot of GI disturbances if you eat a lot. I know I get a lot of bloating. It causes some issues if I have too much of it, but it doesn't seem to have other concerns that we see with non-caloric sweeteners that I discussed. And there's also a monk fruit extract, which has no calories, but it can help add a bit of flavor to your food. A little bit of sweetener too. And if you want to go natural but have some calories, maple syrup, agave syrup, these do have calories, but I still think that going for more natural sugars in their original food matrix, what I mean by that is even like table sugar, it's technically pretty natural, but it's refined. It's taken out of the sugar cane. And so you don't have the fibers or the food matrix around it anymore. But when you have things like maple syrup, it's a little bit more in its natural form. There's some reason to believe that that might be somewhat less bad for you, even though it definitely has the negative effects of all sugars. Everything in moderation, but if you're going to have some sweeteners, try to go for the more naturally occurring ones. Next up, let's talk about emulsifiers. So these are additives that keep your favorite salad dressing from separating into an oily, disgusting mess. Super convenient, but of course there's a catch. Emulsifiers like polysorbate 80, also known as tween 80, and carboxymethylcellulose, CMC, come with a lot of baggage. Studies have shown that these emulsifiers can promote inflammation, speed up cognitive decline, and even cause fat to accumulate in the liver, similar to how foie gras is made by force-feeding ducks to fatten their livers. Let's be honest, no one wants foie gras livers, especially as we get older. It causes a lot of issues, a lot of metabolic disorder. Emulsifiers can actually increase these risks of metabolic disease and actually affect our brain health as well. It leads to symptoms like fatigue, brain fog, and memory issues, which are early indicators of cognitive decline and dementia. That research actually was enough to really put me off of emulsifiers. I used to be all for emulsifiers, and I'm going to explain why they exist, because they really make our food feel better. And I know feel is a funny word to describe for food, but it's true. We use it so much in the food industry because it leads to a more pleasant mouthfeel. So emulsifiers are surfactants. They're chemical compounds that help mix two unmixable substances like oil and water, and it causes this emulsion, a stable blend. If oil and water don't naturally want to come together, the emulsifiers act like a bridge between the two, and it reduces the surface tension and keeps them evenly mixed. Without them, a lot of the foods we typically enjoy would separate, clump together, or have inconsistent texture. The food industry uses emulsifiers for several reasons, and this is why we love them, but we hate them because they have so many bad outcomes. First, they maintain that consistent quality and texture in products. They also prevent ingredients from separating. It maintains that product appearance and shelf stability. It improves mouthfeel, so it makes processed foods more palatable. It also extends shelf life by preventing spoilage due to the separation. And it makes processing easier, ensuring that raw ingredients blend uniformly. For example, sodium stearyl lactylate is used in bread to prevent it from going stale quickly. So your store-bought bread oftentimes will have this emulsifier in it. And lecithin is typically added to chocolate to make it smoother and easier to melt in your mouth, or easier to pour if you're having it in a liquid form. Soy lecithin was one of the first things I learned about, because I remember going to this high-end designer chocolate tour, and they were talking about how their chocolates were so special because they didn't have these emulsifiers added to them. And back then, I just thought that it was this fancy pants thing where you didn't want to have additives to your chocolates because that's more fancy. It's like harder to make. But it actually does have real health effects. Living healthy is so hard, and it gets really expensive. You start to understand why. You have to buy things that unfortunately degrade pretty quickly. Also, emulsifiers like polysorbate 80 and the CMC that I discussed earlier, they're commonly found in products like ice cream, creamy dressings, sauces, and even your baked goods. So it's not just liquids, it's actually in solids as well, like breads and baked goods. Quick review of some common ones, just so you can keep an eye out. There's so many of them. It's way too many for me to go down in this podcast. It would get so boring, but I just want to cover some of the common ones where you can watch out for them in your food products. Polysorbate 80 or P80 is in your baked goods, ice cream, chewing gum, and salad dressings. CMC is used in beer, geez, that's weird. Cake icing, candy, cheese, and pie filling. Oh my God, even pies. Lecithin, so that's usually soy or egg lecithin, is found in chocolate, margarine, mayonnaise, and baked goods. Mono and diglycerides are common in bread, cakes, nut butters, and processed meats. If you've ever wondered why certain nut butters are creamier and certain ones are more separated, just know that the separated one, even though it's like less pleasant and you have to go in there and mix it, it's probably better for you because it doesn't have as many of these emulsifiers in them. Carrageenan is often used in chocolate milk, ice cream, and yogurt. Oh my gosh, yogurt. This is one that is so tough because yogurt is supposed to be healthy, right? But unfortunately, they have a lot of emulsifiers added to it. And this is why you hear sometimes from some health experts saying like you want to avoid the fat-free versions of yogurt or milk because it gets replaced with these emulsifiers to make it smoother tasting. The ideal scenario is go for the less fat and also the non-emulsifier, non-additive type of yogurts, but it's kind of hard for people. You have to like read your ingredients, the nutrition label, just making sure that none of this stuff is in there. Do whatever is sustainable is my rule of thumb. Find your favorite brands, the foods that you trust, or make it yourself. Guar gum and a lot of other things that end with gum, like xanthan gum, etc. These are found in baked goods, dairy products, gravies, and sauces. Unfortunately, for people who are trying to go non-gluten or gluten-free, I found that when I was trying to do that a little bit, not that I'm that sensitive to gluten, it turns out, but gums are used to make the dairy products a bit more like gluten type baked goods. Otherwise, like almond flour isn't as smooth or sticky, and it leads to baking issues. It's one of those challenges, unfortunately, baked goods, because the gluten is what gives it that elastic, awesome feel. And then without it, you have to add things like emulsifier. So you can't win. To dive a little bit deeper, skip this section if you don't want details. You know, you're getting haunted already. But for those who want details about how these emulsifiers really hurt our cells, polysorbate 80 in aged mice actually was shown to increase the pathological protein deposition, also destruction of the blood-brain barrier. So that's the brain's protective wall against toxins. It also activated microglia and neurotoxic astrocytes. So basically, the cleanup crew in the brain turns hostile. And it also induced gut microbiome dysbiosis. Again, the imbalance of gut bacteria. So that contributes further to cognitive decline through altered bile acid metabolism and increased neuroinflammation. A lot of technical terms, but basically there's multiple ways that the P80 was causing a lot of problems in these studies. Also, I wanted to bring this up. I have an entire episode on my other podcast, Health and, about this, but the dysbiosis or imbalance caused by emulsifiers can lead to something called leaky gut or increased intestinal gut permeability. That was a lot of redundant words. Leaky gut, which is also known as increased intestinal permeability. And that's where the gut lining, so the cells that are the walls of your gut, so the walls of your intestine, it becomes more permeable. They kind of separate a little bit, and it allows harmful substances into the bloodstream and increases inflammation throughout the body. That is happening in your gut and also happening in your brain. That leads obviously to all the accelerated aging. This brain fog too can occur, and people even suffer from memory loss. We also see that prolonged exposure to a lot of these emulsifiers like P80 linked to liver lipid accumulation or fatty liver, which also causes inflammation. So in aged mice, we see this directly, and we can see that there's more profound inflammatory responses compared to younger, healthier mice. Emulsifiers can really exacerbate these age-related changes. CMC and P80 have also been implicated in promoting low-grade intestinal inflammation and metabolic syndromes. They disrupt the microbiome again, and this leads to all of this inflammation that's really problematic. Basically, avoid the emulsifiers if you want to have a healthy brain, a healthy gut, a healthy heart, a healthy everything. Emulsifiers are not good. I can't believe that I went for so long in my life. And so if I'm doing anything with today's podcast is watch out for emulsifiers. They're really quite dangerous. Now let's talk about AGEs, or advanced glycation end products. So we've talked about this in the past, but I want to describe it a little bit with some analogy. AGEs are like these sticky byproducts which are formed when sugar binds with proteins or fats at high temperatures. So that crispy edge on a grilled steak. AGEs have been linked to a whole host of age-related problems, including type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disorders. So these guys are the bad actors that make you feel older than you are. AGEs have significant negative effects, similar to the other things we've talked about in this episode, but more oxidative stress, more inflammation. How are AGEs formed? So AGEs are formed during the Maillard reaction, which occurs during high temperature cooking methods like grilling, roasting, and frying. So once ingested, these can accumulate in your tissues and contribute to various chronic diseases and aging-related conditions. Really interesting is that we've known about this for a long time. I remember when I was a kid, one of my great uncles, he knew about this. He was a neurologist, and he would always tell us, oh, don't eat the brown bits and don't eat the burned bits. But he would just say, you know, this leads to cancer. We used to always say everything led to cancer, like, oh, food coloring leads to cancer, like burned bits leads to cancer. And I think it's way more complicated than that. It's just that back in the day, we didn't have the language or the understanding of the mechanisms to describe in more detail the negative impacts of all of these ingredients or all of these things in our food, or what happens after you process foods. Yes, it can lead to things like cancer, but actually it's promoting this accelerated aging, this inflammation, this oxidative stress, which then leads to things like heart disease and cancer. Speaking of which, AGEs do result in greater oxidative stress, more reactive oxygen species via something called the NADPH oxidases and mitochondrial dysfunction. So this destroys everything from your fats, your proteins, to your DNA, and leads to cellular dysfunction, acceleration of your aging process. It's like creating worse rusting in your cells. Back to the inflammation too, AGEs binds to something called RAGE. This further triggers some signaling pathways that upregulates the expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemokines, and adhesion molecules. This actually results in chronic low-grade inflammation, having that fire that never goes out and wears down your body over time. It's implicated in a lot of age-related diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and neurodegenerative disorders. The way that it affects the heart and blood vessels is multifactorial as well. So AGEs, by causing the oxidative stress and inflammation, leads to endothelial dysfunction. So that's the cells that line your blood vessels, your arteries, and accelerates processes like atherosclerosis or plaque formation, which are closely linked to heart disease. And everything that affects the heart typically also affects the brain. So we see that elevated levels of AGEs are associated with neurocognitive decline and an increased risk of dementia. They cause oxidative stress, neuroinflammation, which are tightly linked to the aging of the brain. Foods highest in AGEs. How do we avoid this stuff? These are foods that are processed or cooked at high temperatures, particularly using dry heat methods like grilling, roasting, and frying. Some common examples are red meats, poultry, and processed meats, especially if you're cooking it at high temperature, grilling or frying. We also get it in baked goods. So bread, cookies, cakes, pastries, they have high levels of AGEs due to the Maillard reaction due to baking. So that browning that you see in your baked goods, that is the stuff that you want to avoid. It's so tasty. Even just talking about it, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so bad for you, but maybe a little bit, a little in moderation here and there. If you're cutting down on refined carbs, refined sugars already, you're probably safe from the massive amounts that the typical American or the listener probably is getting. So you can kill two birds with one stone by avoiding the baked goods, unfortunately. We were just talking about high fat versus low fat dairy products. So one mark against high fat dairy products like cheese and butter is that they're rich with these AGEs, especially when they're processed or cooked at high temperatures. So processing is a really hidden danger because we don't think of processing as cooking, but it is. You're exposing a lot of foods to high temperatures when they're getting processed to be shelf stable. Fried foods like French fries obviously are really bad for you, but specifically because they've got lots of AGEs. Fried chicken, anything that's got like deep friedness to it, like the fried batter, which is so delicious and tasty, I know, but they have huge amounts of AGEs. And then like we mentioned, many ultra processed foods, all these snacks, ready to eat meals, fast foods, they have really high levels of AGEs because you've got that high temperature processing and cooking methods. Quick note, eggs have some amount of AGEs, although it's not nearly as high as baked goods or meats. You basically just want to watch out when they're being cooked at high temperatures. So if you want to slow down the aging clock, limit your intake of all these fried and charred and brown foods, the baked foods. I know these are so delicious. I feel you. But by eliminating them, we could really, really feel a little bit healthier, age a little bit slower. This all brings us to an important point. The cumulative effect of all of these additives over time can be really serious. We're talking about chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, metabolic dysfunction. All of this accelerates aging. It's not just soda or just candy or just chips or just hamburgers. It's really the accumulation, the exposure to all of these substances that add up and really contribute to faster aging and higher risks for chronic disease. What can you do about it? Stick to your whole foods, your plants, your fruits and veggies, lean proteins, and whole grains. Less processed, the better. Read your labels. I used to think that this was a silly rule, but I kind of get it. Like, if you can't pronounce it, maybe don't eat it, kind of a thing. It's not going to be the case for all sorts of things. And a lot of people can't pronounce a lot of things. But if it looks like a chemistry textbook, then probably not good for you. Aim for products that don't need nutrition labels, first of all. So if something is just one ingredient, like a whole food, fantastic. But if it does need a nutrition label, go for like 3 to 5 max ingredients. Less is more. Cook at home. Cooking at home really allows you to control so much better what you're putting in your meals. I used to never cook, but this entire year I've been going way into it. It's a new thing for me. If I can turn over a new leaf, you can turn over a new leaf. I actually figured out how to use the air fryer. So recently we had this gas main break in my entire block, like over 100 homes and businesses. And this is New York City, center of New York City. There were like thousands of people impacted for 3 days where we didn't have gas. That means no cooking on the stove, no oven cooking. Also, we didn't have hot showers, and that was a real pain. But I learned how to use the air fryer so fast. For people who don't know what an air fryer is, it comes in a lot of different formats. Mine is one of those electric toaster types. So the rectangle types, I like that because you can put lots of different things in there. I cooked so much fish in there. It's so fast. And you can cook lots of veggies. I did asparagus. I did green beans. You could cook carrots in there. Yeah, I did carrots as well. It's so much faster than the regular oven. I think the only negative of the electric toaster is that it can get kind of grimy and there's a lot of parts. I think we need like a new version of air fryers that doesn't have as many exposed parts so that we can clean them a lot easier. But anyways, it's fast, it's easy. You can cook at home, I promise. Limit your processed snacks as well. Swap out the processed snacks for natural options, nuts, seeds. I reached for dried blueberries. So it's actually really hard to keep blueberries fresh, but you can get dried organic blueberries and they're a little bit more shelf stable, especially if they're freeze dried and you manage to keep much of the nutrients when you dry it that way. And avoid high temperature cooking. So when you're thinking of how to cook, instead of frying or grilling, try steaming, poaching, or baking at lower temperatures. So that can help you with reducing AGEs. I want to end today's podcast episode talking about how we can do this all together. I know a lot of you are listening because you want actionable tips for how to do this in your real life. I want you to join me for an end of the year challenge for the rest of the year, maybe with 1 or 2 cheat days for the holidays. I would love for you to join me in this anti-aging food challenge. If you can't do all of it, that's fine. Just incorporate one anti-inflammatory or antioxidant-rich food each day if you have to. But if you want to, I actually find it to go all out. Like the first step is clearing your home of all temptations. So the first time I did this, I was so sad because I was throwing away things left and right. But just remember, if you are thinking about throwing it away in the trash can, think about what that means for your body when you eat it. Like, is your body a trash can? So think about that. You don't want to be a trash can. So throw away all your chips, things that are shelf stable for a really long time. That's a usually good signal. If something is still shelf stable after a few days, probably not great for you. Or unless you're like me, I leave things like shallots out on the shelf and they start growing green sprouts. That's probably okay, although maybe not recommended for your recipes. And also, if you need to, keep things frozen. So that can preserve a lot of the nutrition in a lot of foods without hurting the flavor in much cases. So let's go through a quick anti-aging shopping list for the next time you're at the grocery store. Go around the perimeter. It is true that produce, things at the edge are better for you. I love Whole Foods, by the way. I know it gets a lot of flack because it's so expensive, but it really is the best way to get pretty local whole foods, thus the name. Go around, grab a lot of colorful fruits like blueberries, strawberries, citrus fruits. They're packed with antioxidants. Stock up on your dark leafy greens like spinach, kale, and Swiss chard. I love white bean soup, so Tuscan white bean soup. It's so easy to make. You just get a bunch of white beans and you mix it with celery, carrots, some spices, Italian spices, some onions, and then you throw in some chard or some other sort of leafy green like escarole with some broth, and then you just boil it, you simmer it. It's so delicious. Also, pick up your healthy fats. Avocados, walnuts, and fatty fish like salmon have a lot of omega-3s, so that can combat inflammation. Don't forget your spices. So turmeric has anti-inflammatory properties, and green tea have these powerful polyphenols. For chocolate lovers, you can pick up dark chocolate. So treat yourself, but only to 70% cocoa or higher. I know it's really dark. I use these cocoa nibs actually, and I throw them onto my smoothies, my chia pudding bowls with some, shaved coconut, and it's so delicious. It's got lots of antioxidants. And then if possible, try to stay away from those emulsifiers that I mentioned, the soy lecithin. So take a look at your chocolate and make sure that it doesn't have these harmful additives that can promote the inflammation or leaky gut. Stock up on your whole grains and legumes as well. So whole oats, so remember the processing of oats actually does matter. So you want rolled oats or steel cut. You don't want the instant oats like people sometimes get for an easy breakfast. Quinoa, if you can stand it. Fun fact, maybe not relevant to anyone out there, but quinoa is the one food that I cannot digest. Every time I try more than like a tablespoon of quinoa, it leads to just these like gut-wrenching cramps and bloating for me. And, there's probably something up with my microbiome that I can't process them properly. But if that's you, cooking it for a little bit longer can be helpful. But everybody's individual. You got to try out the things for you and ease into it. Lentils are also fantastic. And then other legumes are also amazing for you. So that all provides fiber and supports your gut health. Fermented foods. Ooh, these are fantastic. So add kefir, sauerkraut, and kimchi to your cart as well while you're shopping at the grocery store. And this will all help promote your healthy gut bacteria. And I wanted to talk through a daily routine. At the beginning of the day, if you eat breakfast, I personally don't because I shift my eating a little bit later, but there are some benefits to shifting your eating earlier, just as a quick note. So I wanted to provide some tips for every single meal of the day. In the morning, you can have your bowl of rolled or steel-cut oats, top them with blueberries, walnuts, or a sprinkle of cinnamon. I actually would even recommend replacing carbs altogether. So even though oats are generally better for you because they're whole, they still can be a bit of a carb load early in the day. So I actually encourage people to just have eggs or a protein source. Skip the bacon or high temperature cooked meats because that can produce a lot of those inflammatory factors like we mentioned. But eggs are great. 1 cup of coffee or even 2 throughout the day is okay. But I do think that it can be beneficial, especially for people who are slow metabolizers of caffeine, to swap out the 2nd or 3rd cup of coffee with green tea because you'll get some of different antioxidants and also it's somewhat less caffeine. For lunch, I love salads. I used to hate salads, so that's weird that I'm talking about it. I'm from Asia, and in Asia, we call salad grass. That's just a funny thing that I've really turned around on this. I think salads are fantastic. Mix it with your favorite protein, like a hard-boiled egg or 2. Throw in some avocado, put in just some olive oil and some vinaigrette, and that really makes it awesome. This combination is so rich with omega-3s, fibers, and anti-inflammatory compounds. And then if you want a snack, I keep actually nuts and berries. If you just keep them around, you will eat them. Get rid of your unhealthy stuff. That's probably, number 1 tip that I can give to anyone. Just throw away your unhealthy stuff. We're lazy by nature. Humans are lazy creatures. So if you keep out the bad stuff, you're probably not going to go out to the grocery store in the middle of the afternoon to buy a candy bar or a bunch of chips or nachos. If you have it on hand, you'll eat your almonds or your berries. And for dinner, stick to the healthy stuff. So very plant forward, lentil soup, for example, like I described. Have some fermented stuff on the side, some kimchi, some sauerkraut for some added gut benefits. And if you want a treat for dessert, because I love a good treat, you can consider a square of dark chocolate along with some herbal tea. Or if you're like me, I actually really like my chia pudding. Like I've described before, my partner thinks I am positively crazy because what I'll do is I'll put a bunch of chia pudding in the bottom of the bowl, and then I'll put a bunch of blueberries on top of that, and I'll put my cut almonds on top, and then I'll put coconut shavings on top of that, and then some cocoa nibs. And then if I want a touch of sugar, sometimes I'll add some maple syrup. I actually have this like keto maple syrup that's made out of allulose, so that's fun, and some cinnamon. This can really make a lot of difference for your health. It'll protect your cells. It'll bring you more energy. It'll clear your skin, and it'll give you sharper focus, clear that brain fog. So every single small change really, really counts. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Let's do a really quick recap. We started by looking at some of the harmful ingredients that accelerated aging, like trans fats, hydrogenated oils, and artificial additives, like food colorings and emulsifiers. Then we talked about some of the good stuff that you could do at the grocery store, what you can buy, what you can prepare, some quick tips and recipes, anti-aging foods that can help you feel younger and more vibrant and have more antioxidant-rich and anti-inflammatory options. And we went over some of the ways to improve stress resilience, reduce advanced glycation end products, those AGEs, and create an anti-aging daily routine. So I hope this episode helped you feel more informed about how to live a healthier, more vibrant life. If you enjoyed this, please share it with your friends and family who might benefit. Follow and subscribe on all my platforms. I'm Hillary Lynn, MD.